Hey, welcome back to History and Coffee. And today I'm going to be continuing my talks on civil unrest and government corruption with the Battle of McMinn County, or the Battle of Athens, as it's come to be known. But first, I want to make some announcements. I'm going to be bringing in some guest lecturers. A gentleman by the name of Jason is going to come in and talk about some interesting historical crap. So stay tuned for videos from him. And then I also got my buddy here, Casper. Woo! And he's going to be helping me with a new series called Paranormal History, where I'm going to get into some sort of some spooky stuff from American history there. The sort of America's first haunted house. Talk about sort of the origins of flying saucers, who coined the term, who was the first one to see one, Bigfoot, things like that. So stay tuned for that. That should be fun. So the McMinn County War. This was a battle that took place between a corrupt sheriff and his thugs and a group of World War II veterans in Tennessee in 1946. And it has its roots in the 30s. So a gentleman by the name of Paul Cantrell, something of a mobster, came from a rich family, very influential, decided that he was going to run for sheriff of McMinn County, I believe 1936. So he goes out there, hires kind of an unscrupulous political firm to go out there and basically hired thugs, stuff ballot boxes, intimidate people into voting for him, and he wins the sheriff's seat. So he turns around and immediately puts in place a system of kind of fee-for-service. Basically, his deputies are paid by how many fines they can impose on the populace. So these guys would go out and just sort of grab random people off the street and fine them for drunkenness or anything under the sun, and then they would keep a percentage of the fine. These guys would have to pay. The people that they grabbed would have to pay on the spot, or they were often beaten or thrown in jail, or both. And, this was bad. There's a lot of instances of like tour buses that were driving through the county that would be stopped by these deputies, and they would just walk through and fine everybody on the bus, for something ridiculous that they made up on the spot. And of course, this resulted in a few state investigations into political corruption and things like that, but nothing ever came of it because this guy was so well connected, he could basically pay off anybody that would come looking into his business. And whenever elections were held, he'd send his thugs out, rough people up, and he'd always win the vote in a landslide. So we fast forward to the 1940s, and World War II pops off, and a lot of these guys in the county go off to fight. Cantrell sees this as a threat to his political power, and begins a campaign of disinformation. He's got guys. He's got people in the schools and every sort of. He single-handedly runs every aspect of this county, kind of like a little tin pot dictator almost. So he starts, putting out stuff from his news outlets and things that he's running. These guys are just off there lounging in Europe and in the Pacific, and they're not doing anything for you. They're a bunch of freeloaders, and just awful stuff. These guys are off there risking their lives, and this came to a head in 1944 when two soldiers who were on leave were actually shot and killed by some of Cantrell's deputies for resisting arrest, which was bullshit. And these guys are off there in the war, and they hear about this stuff that's going on, and they're terrified to return home. They don't want to come home to this. They've been in the war for years, and they're going to come home to some fascist county government. So 1946 comes. These guys are all released from duty, and they return to McMinn County. And right away, the sheriff sicks his goons on them. These guys are rounded up almost nightly, and when you're released from duty back then, the military would give you a couple months of like severance pay, sort of to fill the gap. Until you were able to find a job. And the sheriff saw this as an easy source of income and a way to sort of stick it to these guys that he saw as a threat. And so he would send his goons out to round these guys up and basically steal their pay. Finally, these guys fucking had enough, and they basically there was it was election night, and they decided, you know what, we're gonna get rid of this guy. You know, he's gonna send his goons out and influence the election. He can't do that if we arm ourselves and you know, guard the ballot box to make sure he doesn't. Anticipating this, Cantrell hired a bunch of extra guys, ended up with sort of a private army of about 200 deputies. And the veterans, armed, marched out there to the polling places, and his deputies marched out there, and gunfire was exchanged between the two groups, which resulted in the deputies actually fleeing with the ballot boxes and locking themselves in the jail. The veterans then laid siege to the jail, insisting that all they wanted was a peaceful election, you know. And of course, Cantrell, knowing this would be the end of his power if there was a peaceful election, refused to come out. More gunfire was exchanged, and finally, now getting into day 2 of this, some guys go and raid one of the local mining companies for some dynamite, and they blow the jail. After that, they were able to go in, retrieve the ballot boxes, lock these guys up, and a fair election was held, resulting in Cantrell and his goons being ousted. Now, one of the more remarkable things about this little 2-day skirmish is nobody was killed. And I think that's pretty incredible, considering the amount of gunfire exchanged and, of course, the explosion at the jail. And, you know, finally justice was served and democracy was maintained. So, you know, what's the takeaway from this? And basically, the Second Amendment kind of gets a bad rap these days, but you have to look at it. And when you read the Federalist Papers and things like that, which is a sort of an account from the Founding Fathers of what their rationale was for the Second Amendment, essentially they foresaw Paul Cantrells and people like that in government that could seize power by nefarious means, and they decided back then that they would put in place a fail-safe. That is, the people have the right to keep and bear arms. And in case any Paul Cantrells come along, you can pick up your gun and you can kick them out. So, and in the case of the Battle of Athens, you can do it without taking a single life, and I think that's pretty incredible. So, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy my series on civil unrest.